Thank you very much to Karen Element for those very nice and I would say flattering and interesting, inspiring, welcoming words. So, and now it is my turn to be a speaker, not just a conferencier. So I will give you a brief overview of what we do here at NORDIS, what our view of the world is, and how we're aiming to work in order to make the Nordic information ecosystem better and more resilient. So we definitely are living not just in a year of elections, but in a very interesting time. And we can as of now, when we invited you to this conference, we did not know which way the dominoes would fall. But now I think a much clearer picture is emerging, and parts of it is quite troubling. For example, we've seen clear evidence that one of the biggest online platforms, especially in the realm of political discourse, has been adjusted to favor a certain political viewpoint, specifically by Elon Musk, who became active in the Republican election campaign on behalf of Donald Trump, and as the New York Times and also Australian researchers have recently revealed, adjusted the X algorithm to bolster the Republican message. So we are seeing a space in which it's not just that non-transparent or black box algorithms are shaping our information space. It is active and conscious efforts to reshape the same information space now, which is really a difference in kind compared to what we saw just a few years ago. We've also seen in Europe, and especially and not least in our region, that one of our neighboring countries have become far more active, not just militarily in the Ukraine, but on our borders, but also in the information space. It is unclear to us what the effects of Russian misinformation is on our public spheres in the Nordic countries, mostly because that disinformation can be very hard to detect, but we know it's there. And that's an additional reason for us in NORDIS, but also in society at large, to attempt to strengthen not just our actual information systems, but the resilience of our citizens against the same kind of misinformation, enabling them to understand that when, for example, divers in uniform appear on Svalbard, claiming not to be affiliated with the Russian military at all, it is an information operation. It's not just a random occurrence. It's something that we need to understand, and we need to take action in order to protect ourselves against the narratives that these kinds of actions are attempting to establish. But we're also seeing, not just in politics, but in the domain of technology, the uncertainty connected to our information ecosystem is increasing. And we're not sure exactly in which direction it is increasing, but we can see, for example, that Moscow, it is now known, attempted to smear the Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz with fake sex abuse claims, using a deepfake video of an alleged former student of his. We've seen similar things in Europe as well, especially, and I think this is an example that will be familiar to most of the people in the audience today, from Slovakia last year, where a deepfake audio of one of the prime ministerial candidates, where he claimed, or appeared to claim, that he would double the price of beer or buy votes from the Roma minority in the country, was circulated on YouTube just before the election. So we know that the technological evolution that is currently ongoing might pose an even greater threat to the integrity of our information ecosystem than just state-governed misinformation or just adjustments to the algorithms of the main platforms done by magnates like Elon Musk. Finally, we are also seeing backlash against climate policies in Europe. And I speak about this not least because I am Norwegian, and in Norway, 1 in 4 citizens do not believe that human activity is the primary cause of climate change. So we know that there is fertile ground for climate misinformation, which is one of the focus points of NORDIS. So with that slightly depressing backdrop, but it's also, this is what our world looks like right now, I'm going to move on to talking a bit about how NORDIS is trying to address some of these problems and how we are working together. So the most important thing for NORDIS and our main vision is contributing to the resilience and quality of the information ecosystem in the Nordic countries. And as we are a group of fact checkers, researchers, and technologists from across the Nordic region, we have our own specific angle through which we approach this problem. So we want to work day to day to debunk the misinformation that is actually spreading in our countries and in our region. We want to bolster the digital information literacy of the Nordic citizens and do a more general train journalists, spread knowledge about how you can verify images, check your sources, fact check on your own that can overall strengthen the entire regional information ecosystem. And to us, we work along 5 main axes. I can see that some of the things here have become a bit out of whack, but hopefully our Zoom audience will not mind some lines being displaced. But we do various things jointly that we think are mutually reinforcing. The fact checkers and the journalists in our consortium do joint investigations. So we try to find misinformation phenomena, maybe super spreaders working in the Nordic region and expose them or debunk their claims together. So then in these cases, Faktisk, Checkta, Faktabody, and Kildkritikkbyrån work together to develop cases, to interview sources and figure out what is going on, and then in order to debunk and expose misinformation. We do coordinated media literacy work across the entire region. So here, this work is led by Faktabody, our Finnish partner, also working with especially Faktisk and Checkta. And in those cases, we create educational materials, but we also work together with the fact checkers to inform the educational materials we actually put out in the world. So in this way, the Nordic fact-checking community and the Nordic media literacy community can reinforce each other through our consortium, amplify their work, and help each other. With FOJO at Linnéuniversitetet in Sweden, we train journalists. This is also done at the University of Bergen in Norway, and with our partners across the entire region. So here at the MJX, but also Tampere University in Finland, we try to reach journalists, because another way of reinforcing the information ecosystem is to help journalists, who are one of the main sources of information for citizens across the entire region, to know how to fact check, help them do verification of imagery, for example, from conflict zones or other places, which will increase the quality of the journalism and increase the reliability of the journalism more specifically, which in turn helps improve our shared information ecosystem. In addition to this, we are facing a situation where it is possible now to create a massive amount of misinformation at almost zero marginal cost due to the developments in generative AI. And that means that the traditional fact-checking methods and the traditional research methods are no longer sufficient in order to counter and debunk the misinformation that could be out there. And to that end, in order to help us deal with this, we have technologists in our consortium, both from the University of Bergen, but also from the company Factiverse, developing technological tools that help us address larger amounts of misinformation and just deal with the enormous amount of content that is out there. And finally, we try to engage in political processes where applicable. We are working with EDMO to look at the code of practice on disinformation, how it's implemented, and how compliance with the code is. But we also engage locally in various political processes in our respective countries to help shape the policies that is supposed to strengthen our information ecosystem and protect us against misinformation. So I guess I already said this, so I'm going to skip the slide. So I'm going to dive in a bit more in detail now on what we do. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about how our fact-checking actually works and how we work to debunk misinformation, because a very important part of protecting and strengthening the information ecosystem is to make sure, or at least decrease the amount of misinformation, misleading narratives, and just bogus claims that circulate there. So we approach this through a variety of different angles. The main one, and I think the one that most people will be familiar with, is the traditional fact-checking. We discuss what we're fact-checking in common so that we know what is going on in each of the member countries, but we also try to debunk misinformation that is important in each partner country. So that's claims made in the public sphere by actors ranging from scammers to, I guess you can fill in the blank here, but politicians, celebrities, other significant people who actually make a difference to the citizens' view of the world and their perspective on current affairs. We also look at both viral misinformation on social media and the people and sometimes the technologies behind it. So one example of this was when Chekta investigated Facebook scammers. So I think most of you have read, at least those of you who live in Denmark, have seen these stories already. It's about fake ads for crypto investments, sort of fake, I guess, where you can see celebrities trying to talk you into investing like them in crypto. So Chekta had a very impressive investigation of these scammers, talking to them, exposing their network, understanding how they operated, and also how much money Facebook actually earned from their ads. So this is also, it's a very important part of the kind of journalism that fact-checking belongs to, is to actually expose how misinformers work, why they do what they do, and how they are able to succeed when they succeed. And I think the Chekta stories are an excellent example of how this can actually help. Because hopefully, and given how much attention those stories got, it will actually help most citizens in Denmark, or a lot of citizens in Denmark, resist these attempts at scamming in the future. We also work on verifying audiovisual content. So especially in the past couple of years, but in fact, since maybe the Gulf War, coverage of war has been really dependent on a continuous flow of images and video from the war zone. However, in the past few years or in the past decade, this is also something that has become much more easy to exploit. Manipulated video, manipulated footage, images, and so on are very common in this area. So both at Faktisk and at other newsrooms in NORDIS, we work to verify the images that purport to be depicting an event, for example, in a war zone. And to that end, we use satellite imagery, we use eyewitness accounts when they're available, and we try to make sure that the public image of wars that affect everyone at the global stage is as accurate as possible. Finally, and credit goes to Faktabari here, I'm going to talk a bit more about this later, we try to explore how the information ecosystem we all inhabit, which is at least partially algorithmically generated, actually operates. So what are the effects of the algorithms that shape our common information universe? Now, we also, and this is, I know that this is kind of a smorgasbord of what we're doing, which is good for me to talk about because I'm very proud of what we have already achieved. And then we want to do at least strike a slightly optimistic note that some solutions are actually possible despite the very depressing background to our present time. So we do, together with Factiverse, develop tools for fact-checking. I mentioned earlier that one of the main problems facing fact-checkers is the massive amount of content that's out there. It's not humanly possible to even know a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the amount of content that actually exists online. That's why, in order to help us fact-check and debunk misinformation in the NORDIS, we have invited technology companies into our consortium. The main one being Factiverse, who have made a live fact-checking tool that can monitor any video or usually we mostly use it for political debates so far, but it actually tracks all of the claims that you can see that are made at a debate or in a video. And then you can fact check them because you get access to some of the sources supporting or undermining the claims made, which obviously makes the work of fact checkers significantly easier, because looking through claims, finding sources is laborious and arduous work, and anything that can make us more productive and more efficient is a godsend, basically. We also, from the University of Bergen, are experimenting with a second prototype, a verification dashboard. So this is a very promising tool where you can drag and drop video into a dashboard, and then it will give you information about what's going on in the video. So, for example, the plan is it gives you transcriptions. It eventually will give you object detection. So it's much easier to get a grasp on the kind of video you're actually seeing, which is also very useful because actually looking through a video and visually, as a human, detecting all of the objects, listing them, transcribing the audio, that also takes a lot of time. That is not very productive. So we're very happy to have these tools at our disposal and working to improve them. I think it's going to make our life as fact checkers much easier. And now, with the French technology company Check First, and together with Faktabari, we are working to map out how algorithms affect our information ecosystem. So one example was the report that they made this year about the TikTok effect and how TikTok shaped the discourse surrounding the Finnish European elections. So the idea here is essentially, in order to know how algorithms affect our information space, you need to see it in real time, and you need to see real data from real users. So Check First and Faktabari have given some volunteers access to Raspberry Pi computers that monitor their web traffic on different apps. And in those cases, you can see when they search for a certain term, you can see what kind of results they're getting. So you can see what the recommendations from some platform, for example, TikTok or Google or YouTube, what they actually are. And for example, in the case of Finnish elections, one of the findings from this project was that far-right content would surface more easily than other types of content. And I see Pipsa nodding. She was one of the main people in this project. So as long as she's nodding, I'm not misinforming you, which is, I would say in this context, especially quite important. But this is a very interesting project that's just in its starting phase, and we hope to be able to understand much more about how algorithms shape the information people in the Nordic region actually encounter, and if there are other biases or latent biases in that space. So I mentioned at the outset that in order, we think, and this was one of the main ideas behind NORDIS, at least for this funding period that we're in currently, that it's not enough to just debunk misinformation as fact checkers and to explore the algorithmic generation of our information ecosystem. Because we are relatively small news organizations, we have quite a bit of reach, but not enormous. And the main part of our information ecosystem is shaped by mass media in our respective countries. So we think that a very important approach is to also help mass media become better and more adept at fact checking. So let's just take an example from Norway. So a couple of years ago, it turned out that multiple big Norwegian media outlets, and when I say big, I mean the major dailies and also the public broadcasters, had, without intent, published tweets made by known Russia-affiliated accounts as part of their foreign affairs coverage. So, for example, some event had happened in Paris, and one of the Twitter accounts that they cited as providing information about this event, I unfortunately can't remember the exact event, was a known Russian-affiliated account. And what that told us is that when it comes to domestic affairs, fact-checking and source awareness in mass media is generally quite good, there are some blind spots. And a lot of those blind spots are definitely connected to the kind of work fact checkers do and verification journalists do. So in our view, we can help improving our information ecosystem by improving journalists. I guess you can call it gut reflexes, basically, so that you actually don't cite this account without checking where it comes from and what its affiliation is. So, and helping them to learn the same methods that we use in order to verify facts, to verify audiovisual content, and so on. So by doing that, we hope that the overall media ecosystem will also improve as a result of our work. And I think it's probably if it works, it's probably going to be one of our more lasting impacts because it affects and targets so many people at the same time. So for us, this is a very important way of amplifying the work we do. But that's not all, because there's one thing that's even bigger, and that's the entire citizenry. And to us, we have, from the beginning of NORDIS back in 2021, we have worked on digital information literacy. And we create educational materials for use in schools. We create courses for adults. We also create guides for teachers and other educators to follow when they are teaching their students. So you can see that there is in the digital information literacy space, we have a very similar approach to what we do in media. We create concrete educational materials, but we also target the people who have the most impact on, especially on young people's lives, so that they can use what we know and the kind of knowledge that's now currently internal to the digital media information literacy community and the fact-checking community that can enter into schools, into other kinds of courses, adult education, and so on. And we are trying to coordinate these efforts across the Nordics because we know that we face a lot of the same problems. Our societies are quite similar, as Karen Ellemann also mentioned in her opening speech. And we think we are able to connect both media literacy and information literacy to the kind of efficiency and on the spot of journalism. So we are able to use educational materials to address the information challenges of today and not just general trends and so on. Here are some examples of our media literacy materials. Some of this is in Norwegian, some of it is in Danish. So this is just the variety of what we are actually doing. So we have Beviste, which means prove it, is a very straightforward, simple educational program directed at students in junior high school, where they go through 1 hour of classroom activity to help them understand how they should deal with viral stories on social media or viral content on social media. So their task is really just to try to prove the claims made in the content that's part of the educational material. There's a digital information literacy guide made by Faktabari, which was just recently updated to reflect the developments in generative AI. And there's also the big educational package from Chekta and Faktisk about artificial intelligence in school. And I think this is just from the first half year of our current consortium, so I think there is much more to come in this area. I wanted to say a little bit about our policy work as well. So, as Karen Ellemann especially knows, but that several of the consortium members were part of the Nordic Council of Ministers think tank on big tech and democracy. And part of the founding principles of NORDIS are connected to the report that this think tank delivered. So especially when it comes to strengthening media literacy in the Nordic countries, but also strengthening fact-checking. So we work towards some of the same targets in our day-to-day work. But we also engage in various political processes in our respective countries. The latest example is the Norwegian expert group, because for the 2025 elections, looking at how artificial intelligence can influence the 2025 parliamentary election. So we gave a presentation from the NORDIS perspective about how we assess the threat of artificial intelligence in next year's elections, hopefully shaping some of the policy response to these recent technological developments that also affect our democratic processes. And of course, we are working with a lot of our international partners and our partners in EDMO, the European Digital Media Observatory, our funding body, and also the body that we are a hub of. And we also want to foster transatlantic dialogue, especially now that we see how the information ecosystem in the US is more or less unraveling. We want to discuss developments with our US colleagues and help them where we can and understand their experiences. So we have already met with them once in late October, and we will meet them again in January just to see how things are developing in the US and how Europe can understand itself in the light of what happens in the US, but also whether we can aid the US in dealing with the information threats they are currently facing, and that will likely intensify over the next few years. I am going to end by looking a bit ahead for our consortium. And we started by saying that we live in interesting times, but I think we also live in very uncertain times. And one of the main factors driving the uncertainty that we're currently experiencing is, I think, the uncertainty surrounding the impact of AI on disinformation. So in this election year, when it started, we expected a huge impact from AI-generated misinformation. However, as far as we have been able to tell this year, and as far as the empirical work that has been done in this area suggests, AI has not so far had a huge impact on elections or on other parts of our information ecosystem, at least not AI-generated misinformation. And On the other hand, we are seeing signs that this situation might change very soon. We know that scammers are using AI-generated video content to fool even more people, which suggests that there is some way of using generative AI to create and spread misinformation and disinformation. But we don't know when it will happen. We don't know how it will happen. So, which leaves us in an uncomfortable position, because I thought, and we thought when we started our consortium, that it will just be a huge inflow of a massive volume of AI-generated misinformation. We haven't seen that so far. And so now we don't really know how the Gen AI impact on disinformation is going to play out. And that creates significant uncertainty about the future shape and quality of our information ecosystem. I think we can also expect an uptick in climate misinformation in the coming years, because this year especially, and maybe also last year, there was a major backlash against European climate policies. And climate misinformation is one of the main focus areas of NORDIS, so we expect quite a bit of activity in this domain in the next year or months. Finally, and this is a challenge that I think, this is not something that we are alone in grappling with, but I think it affects the entire media industry. So the information ecosystem is increasingly fragmented, and I think, again, the US shows us at least a possible future for ourselves as well. So in the past couple of years, and especially in this election, you can see that individual influencers, more one-person media companies, are gaining a lot of ground compared to traditional mass media. And if the information ecosystem fragments further, it's already been platformized, so everyone's on different platforms and are communicating with each other through private channels. I think we will lose our overview of the information ecosystem more generally, because fragmentation also increases complexity and makes it more difficult for us to understand, to borrow a phrase from someone you might recognize, what the hell is going on. So I think we definitely have our work cut out for us for the next couple of years. It's not going to be easy. I think we have laid a solid foundation for our work, but I think we will face a lot of challenges, and I think most of you in this room and in the online audience as well will face some of the same challenges. So my hope is that we can work together to actually address these challenges as best as we can here in our region. So thank you. One thing that I haven't asked the organizers about is if we're supposed to take questions. So I'm going to do that now so that we don't. Awesome, yeah. There's a microphone that we can pass around if you have questions. So there's one over here.
You said that you were training some.
Yeah, the people on stream will need to.
You said that you were training some journalists and other people and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But who is training these people that make this disinformation? Where do they get their knowledge from? And is something they invent themselves, or is there some kind of training going on? Do we have any knowledge about that?
Sorry, yeah, so you are referring to the people who are actually creating disinformation?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't know. I would expect, if they are state-backed, for example, I would expect them to have received some training. Maybe not all of them have received training based on some of the quality of the disinformation that's circulating out there, but I would expect at least those people to have received some training. As far as the most interesting case here, I think, are the crypto scammers. So, because they have a very consistent approach, and so which would lead you to think that they have received some kind of training, or at least are following some kind of template. But this is an area where we can really only speculate, unfortunately. If we had known what kind of training they had received, I think it would be much easier to counter the misinformation as well, because then we would have a direct view of their tactics.
Hi, Andreas Sundfors from For Media Institute in Sweden. We know something about it. We know about this troll factory in St. Petersburg and how they organize their work. There were certain targets to be reached with the disinformation workers. How many posts per day? How many characters? And also what kind of catalog of disinformation narratives they wanted to attack. So in the context of Russian disinformation, there has been some work done on that. In Jessica Aro's book about against the fighting Putin and the disinformation, there's a thick chapter about how the troll factory in St. Petersburg worked. So that could be one answer to your question.
Definitely, and I think with intelligence agencies and so on, we know that they have at least had these kinds of targets and trainings in the past, and likely still have them. But we don't know specifically what the targets are, which would have been very useful to know, at least for those who try to counter misinformation.
Thank you. Just that, of course, on the other side, it's so much easier. You can just test everything, and whatever hits, you can measure it and produce more of it. So, but it's a very relevant point to follow the theme. And then on Jessica, who is a fellow Finn, made a very good work on the Putin's troll factory, revealed a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, this happens to the best of us. Now got a wrong narrative that we had to fact check in Finland. It just explains that this is just a kind of a pre-bunking what we are trying to do.
Thank you so much.
We still have time for the question.
Okay. We know that at least the Danish Defense Intelligence Authority, they have put misinformation on the agenda on cyber threats as such.
Mm-hmm.
So it's on the agenda, and we also know that that the defense intelligence and also the police intelligence in Denmark, they have systems to track trolls going on and misinformation campaigns going on in the ecosystem out there. So I'm just wondering if you are considering any kind of collaboration with those authorities in this context. Thank you.
That is a very interesting question, and one that has a slightly complicated answer. So it's clear that defense agencies and the national security apparatus more generally is now much more concerned about misinformation than they were, say, 10 years ago, which obviously makes sense from their perspective. And in a way, they might seem like natural collaboration partners for us, but it's something we are hesitant to engage in, and that has to do with the fact that our main debunking and detection work comes from journalists. So we have a journalistic approach to this area. And journalists working too closely with the national security apparatus, it's not just bad optics, it is generally a bad idea. Because you will be influenced by the people you are collaborating with, either consciously or unconsciously. And I think that kind of collaboration would be a threat to the independence of both of our consortium and especially to the editorial and the journalistic side. So we of course engage in dialogue with the national security apparatus, but we will not enter into formal collaborations with them. That's a very important principle for us. So I think that means that when working against misinformation and disinformation in our region, it's better to think of the national security approach and the journalistic approach as being parallel and complementary, but not formally complementary. I think then time is up, or at least an alarm went off. So so thanks everyone for listening to me. I'm now going to give you our next speaker,